For more than a year, in anticipation of changes to the Board of Pensions medical benefits, Commission on Ministry members and other Presbytery leaders have been engaged in a series of conversations regarding the impact of these anticipated changes. We were concerned about the narrative that our congregations can save money by possibly no longer caring holistically for pastors. In a world where most pastors' salaries are modest, we are concerned that not providing thoughtful care for our pastoral leaders would or could compromise the health of ministry. Understanding also that healthcare costs have skyrocketed, we are aware of the challenges that our congregations and our pastors are experiencing. This new normal that has been laid out by the Board of Pensions will take us some time to fully understand. As such, the Commission on Ministry is committed to offering our response in a way that will serve the short term while allowing us the time to consider the longer term impact. So a little bit of background. Terms of call for installed pastors are required to include participation in the Board of Pensions plan, including pension and medical coverage. This is required in the Book of Order. That has meant for decades the pastor's participation program, which includes medical coverage for the whole family if needed. The Board of Pensions has now reinterpreted that Book of Order mandate to apply to only the employed minister serving in a congregation, meaning that the Board of Pensions only requires medical coverage for the minister to be covered by the congregation. A spouse, children, and family can be added with the cost covered by the church, by the minister, or that cost may be shared between the church and minister. This change has, of course, created a lot of anxiety for ministers, especially those with families who are dependent on the medical coverage received through the church. Other ministers have expressed a desire for this kind of flexibility. These changes do open up some new possibilities, expanding eligibility for what has been called the Minister's Choice Plan and what will now be called the Covenant Plan, for example. With these changes, some things previously assumed or guaranteed have been left to churches and presbyteries to determine. So in order to craft an approach for our presbytery, we convened a task force of 10 elders and ministers made up of COM members and non-COM members, a group that reflects the diversity of our presbytery. That task force recommended theology and principles to guide us into 2025. That theology and principles document has since been approved by the Commission on Ministry as well. We decided to set guidance for 2025, allowing us time to see what the impact will actually be and how we might craft guidance going forward. We know that we don't know yet what we don't know yet. But we also know that we needed to have some guidance for this moment. So this is what's now, and what's next will be yet determined. We are trying to mitigate the impact for 2025 in order to allow us time to live into these changes and see and learn what may be needed going forward. The theology is meant to be a more evergreen document, the first part of the document approved by the task force and Commission on Ministry. And so the theology part lays out 3 principles: connectional, call neutrality, and community nature. So first, connectional. All ministers are members of the presbytery, and the presbytery has a responsibility to set minimum terms of call and review terms of call. This process should be standardized, but we also recognize that all ministry is local. Every context is unique. We need to balance standardizing the best practices and flexibility where beneficial. The second theological principle is call neutrality. For most of its history, the Board of Pensions has maintained this value, where dues are paid based on the position, not the family status of the person in the position. We in the Presbytery of Philadelphia believe that terms of call should be budgeted to provide full family coverage paid for by the congregation. Congregations may not search for a pastor without spouse and children because of the lower cost. congregations should also be mindful that ministers and their family status may change. The third theological principle is the community nature. It used to be that the completely dues-based model meant that larger, better resourced congregations in essence subsidized our smaller churches. That is less true, but still true to some extent with the new structure. The Presbytery of Philadelphia welcomes conversations about how the Presbytery's resources, which originated from our congregations, can be put to use to support congregations and maintain the communal nature of this call. So the theological principles, which are intended to be an evergreen document that these will continue into the future, those principles are connectional, call neutrality, and community nature. The next part of the guidance that we've put forth are the principles meant for 2025. So these may change going forward as we live into this plan, but this is our starting point for 2025. And these are adapted from Newcastle Presbytery with our gratitude. The first is that full medical coverage for pastors and their families is a value that we uphold. So no one loses medical coverage that they need in 2025. Maintaining this coverage in 2025 ensures a longer off-ramp for pastors and churches who need to explore alternatives. The second principle is that the 2024 terms of call total compensation is the starting point for 2025. No one's 2024 terms of call should go down because of a reduction in Board of Pension dues. In other words, the total bottom line cost to the church for pastoral leadership, including salary and benefits, will not go down in 2025 from what it is in 2024. For pastoral leaders who do not require family coverage, the reduced cost in Board of Pension dues will be allocated elsewhere in their compensation. For example, in salary, 403B contributions, study leave, or some combination thereof. The third principle is that the Presbytery is here to come alongside churches navigating these changes. We already offer the small church compensation grant, and we are exploring additional possibilities for support. COM members serve as covenant partners and are happy to engage in conversation with churches who need to consider their options in light of these changes. So now we get to the 2025 minimum terms of call. This is where the rubber meets the road and where we get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty and the details. First, the usual and more straightforward part. COM has approved a 4% increase to minimum salary. We have recognized that our minimum effective salary here in Philadelphia is significantly behind many of our peer judicatories. For 2024, ours is about $58,900. The ELCA in this region is $64,700. Newcastle Presbytery in Delaware is $62,700. Southern New Jersey is $58,800. Donegal and mainline out to Lancaster is $64,600, and Baltimore is $66,400. So in light of that, COM has approved a 4% increase to the minimum terms of call with a commitment to better match our peer judicatories by 2029. This is important for us in attracting and retaining talented ministers so that our churches can flourish. Now the more complicated part, considering medical coverage within the new Board of Pensions structure. We can no longer assume the same 39% dues for all installed pastors. In an effort to maintain the value of call neutrality, where pastors cost the same regardless of their family status, we are looking not just at the effective salary, but also the total compensation. Now, this isn't totally new for us. We do have precedent in other calls for considering total compensation. For example, a higher salary when a pastor is a supply pastor because they don't need benefits. This preserves the line item in the church budget so that the church is prepared if their next pastor does need those benefits. We've set the minimum total compensation for 2025 at an amount sufficient to include the Transitional Pastors Participation Program, which is the Board of Pensions glide path to assist in the transition to the new model. The TPP provides the same coverage as the current pastors' participation at an increased dues percentage. So you'll see on the first page of the minimum terms of call for 2025, the usual first line for effective salary is $61,088.68. And then you'll see the SECA, the professional expenses, study leave allowance, all of which you're used to seeing. What's new on the first page is the covenant package, which is 10% of the effective salary. That used to be rolled into as part of the pastor's participation program. The 39% was 10% for everything but medical, the pension, death and disability, temporary disability, and then 29% for medical. So covenant package is the everything but medical. And so that's in there as the baseline. What's also new on the first page is the minimum total compensation, which is $95,530, and you'll see on page 2 where that number comes from. So we'll turn to page 2 for the medical coverage. Because that's a little more complicated now under the new changes, there's a whole chart on page 2 to show the medical coverage costs. So you'll see on the chart that there is the pricing for member only, member plus children, member plus spouse, member plus family. All of those in green are under the new structure for the Board of Pensions. The gray column at the end, the Transitional Pastors Participation Program, that is available for the next 3 years. And it is available for all pastors who are enrolled in Pastors Participation. That's the current program, that's the 39% dues. If you are enrolled in that as of December 31st, 2024, you are eligible for the Transitional Pastors Participation Program, which will be 43% dues in 2025. So you can see how it's broken out to include the salary, SECA, the covenant package, professional expenses, and study leave. All of those costs are the same across the board. And then the medical costs vary depending on whether you opt for the Transitional Pastors Participation at 33% for the medical coverage, or the Congregational Pastors Package, which is 16% to cover the minister only, and then a flat rate to cover spouse, children, and or family. And then you'll see where the differences in costs come in across the way. So the $95,530, that is the cost of the Transitional Pastors Participation Program, that's where we got the minimum total compensation number for 2025, so that all congregations are budgeting sufficiently to provide family coverage if needed. What you'll notice is that the member only and the member and children costs are slightly below that 95 or significantly below that 95 in the case of member only. And so you'll see the second to last row identifies the differential in the cost there. So that cost differential should be distributed somewhere else in the pastoral compensation. So in the case of someone who needs member only, there's $10,385 to be distributed elsewhere. It could be salary, it could be 403B contributions, study leave, or some combination thereof. This is all in an effort to preserve that value of call neutrality so that it does not cost more or less for a pastor whose family status is different. So in summary, these Board of Pensions changes have significantly changed the landscape. What you've heard here on this video is our 1-year transition plan. We are doing our best to minimize the impact of these changes in 2025 while we live into them and see what might be needed going forward. In this, we uphold the value of caring for our pastors in a way that will encourage their spiritual health and longevity in ministry. We also uphold the value of family medical coverage as part of caring for our pastors holistically. To maintain the value of call neutrality, it is now important to consider the total compensation, not just the effective salary. I also want you to know that the Presbytery has resources to support you. We already have the Small Church Compensation Grant. This grant is available for small churches. It's meant for those who are right on the cusp of being able to afford full-time leadership. And you can receive up to $10,000 for up to 3 years as you are strategically plotting a path forward for vibrant ministry in the future. The Presbytery is also exploring other possible avenues of support. For churches who have endowed funds that you have been saving for a rainy day, well, it's pouring right now. And this may be the time to consider how you can use those funds to support your ministry. As one of my own elders says so well, it would be a shame for a church to die with money in the bank. As we all learn and live into this new reality, we encourage you to be in touch with your COM liaison or your regional moderator if you have questions and concerns. We know that everyone's situation is different, and we will walk with you to consider what your options are. May the peace of Christ be with you as you navigate these changes, and know that we are committed to journeying with you on that way.